Hello and welcome to today's Uncommon Sense. I'm Joshua Barnes, the founder of Process Mentors, and as usual, I am joined by Steve Tendon and Al Shalloway. If you guys want to introduce yourselves as well.
Hello, friends of Herbie. This evening's episode is about something you all have, habits. But I know Al is going to promote Agile Habits, but given the title, I prefer the uncommon habits. So let's see if there are any of those. Al.
Yeah, so I'm CEO of Success Engineering. Be hearing more about that in the next few days. Actually, making some announcements. The concept of an agile habit stems from something I did at Net Objectives with my crew. Well, the history probably goes back about 18 years, and then the actual notion of a habit, maybe a year or two after that. When we do design pattern training, or when we did design pattern training, and Scott Bain is still offering the same training at the PMI. If you're looking for good technical training, the design pattern training they offer is the best there is. Of course, I'm biased because I helped create it. Scott's taken it further than me. But we came up with the notion of a practice. Okay, and I'm going to use the word practice in the technical side, but which was doing something universally that doesn't always help, but has virtually no cost and often does help, or sometimes does help. Now, the reason I changed it from practice to habit is because in the agile space, there are agile practices that are definitely not what I'm talking about. The idea of a habit, or what I mean in the agile space, is a very quick thing. So like an example of a quick practice, this universal, almost no work, is like when you go into a doctor's office, and if you're in the examining room and they come in, you'll notice one of the first things they do is they wash their hands. They do it all the time, whether they need to or they don't need to. Most of the time, they don't need to. They probably have not even touched another patient. They may have just come in and you're the first patient they're seeing, and they'll wash their hands anyway. So that's what we mean by a practice in the technical space. And I changed it to habit so we wouldn't confuse with practice like daily stand-ups or something. That's more than a habit. A daily stand-up takes a lot of effort, may or may not be useful, whereas these habits I'm talking about are universal, take almost no effort, so they don't waste their time, but can make a big difference. So when I said so what I was looking at is in the agile space or process workflow space. The question is, how many of these exist? And I got to say, when I started writing this post, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago or something, I thought, just a week. I thought, there got to be a lot of these. And to be truthful, I can only come up with 3. So let me tell you the 3 I came up with. I know there are more. I'm haven't spent too much time thinking about it. But one is one that's actually really, really powerful. And I've seen it in action with people I've consulted with. And it's real simple. It's anytime you get a requirement, somebody says, hey, we need to get this done. You should always ask, how will I know I've done that? Now notice how quick that was. It takes 5 seconds. How will I know I've done that? That's what I mean by a habit. Very quick, very easy. You'd be surprised. Maybe not. But I have seen that 5-second question save hours and hours. And I'm not talking about a heavy duty testing. I mean, just sometimes people just have a disconnect, and that question solves the disconnect, and it takes virtually no time. Now, sometimes you might have to go back and say, well, we're going to have to write requirements and all that. I'm saying, okay, great. But just how will I know I've done that? What are you going to look at? This is kind of keep the end in mind is one way to look at it. Now, another one, maybe a little bit more time, but not much. And you've heard this as stop, starting, start, finishing. But when you finish something, look for something else to finish before you look for something else to start. Usually it's very quick. You should have a board that tells you what's up there next. See if you can help somebody. If you finish a story, see if you can finish another story. Things of that nature. If you finish a story and there's nobody else you can help, then start a story within the feature. That's a story for the feature you just finished the story for. At least you're starting to finish the feature. So you can also look up. So that's the second habit. And the third habit is consider how you're going to test something before beginning implementation. So this is a quick reflection. Okay, well, they told me this is what I should consider. This is kind of begin the end in mind as well. I'm not talking of being a software thing, although it can be, but look at how it will behave before you start implementing. So those are three. How will I know I've done that? Look for something you can finish before you start something, and consider how you would validate something before you pick up anything else. So I'm going to turn this back to you two and ask, what agile habits do you have? Ask Herbie too. So you got two options, Steve. You can tell me, or you can let Herbie whisper in your ear and tell me what he said.
Well, I would start from your last thing with the testing thing, because I typically say if I had to choose one thing, only one thing, to help software engineering teams perform better, well, for me, that would be test-driven development. Now, let's not confuse this with test first. I mean the real thing, the one that Kent Beck described so eminently way back when he was explaining to the world about how you do XP. So real test-driven development with microcycles to write the test, write the code, do the refactoring there in a matter of minutes. So very, very quick feedback from what you're doing. Now, of course, not everyone is inclined to do test-driven development, and I think a lot of the industry just doesn't know what it really means. So that's something worthwhile exploring. But Al, you asked me about Herbie, and Herbie will tell you, well, what about the habit of critical thinking? Now, question everything all the time. Don't take things for granted. Uh, Answer difficult questions or pose difficult questions, and never take for granted that what you are doing is the best thing. If you are in that mindset that you want always to improve, the process of ongoing improvement, well, that means you never stop asking questions. That would be my habit.
Well, I'm going to play on that, and then Joshua, I'd like you to go in on that last one. You could say the habit would be, if somebody suggests something, you say, why are you suggesting that? Not like a challenge, but like an understanding. That would be a nice, quick response. Okay, what's your logic so I can understand? Not, oh, you're crazy to be thinking that. So you got to make sure you're asking it the right way. And I will say one thing, though, about the TDD. So if you truly do full-blown TDD, that's more than a habit. Although you could say, I'm getting into the habit. I'm looking for something quick. But if you're doing coding, the core piece of TDD is asking yourself, how is a kind of combination of, how do I validate this? What is the test specification that validates this? And then you write your code. So there could be arguments as to how far you go, but I would agree that's a very key thing. So Joshua, what do you have to add to this?
So before I add the first agile habit, or Steve, as you put it, on the common sense habit. One thing I want to share is, so as Al came up with the idea for this particular episode, which I thought was very interesting, Steve came up with something equally interesting. And what Steve came up with is, we use a broadcast platform called StreamYard to do these sessions in. And what we want to do is we want to open this up for those of you that are in attendance today, right? I mean, obviously we can't do this in a non-live situation if you're watching this on replay, but I see Claudia, and I see Peter, I see Harry. What I'd like to be able to do is we'll give you an opportunity, if you would like, to come into the broadcast studio and be able to share your agile habit or your common sense habit with us. So we'll get you into the studio, give you a minute or two, and then we'll move you out of the studio and move somebody else in. So that's kind of the format for today. And not only do I think it's great for today, but it's something I hope we can do on a much more regular basis. So for me, the habit that came to mind first when Al started talking about this was the habit of getting into asking, is this the minimum we can do? Because we can always do more, right? And so for me, one of the things that I like to see coaches that are working with teams do is I like them to work with the entire team, all the team members. I like them to definitely work with product owners and stakeholders to really understand this idea of the minimum, right? Because that enables us to get feedback quicker. It enables us to get stuff out the door quicker. It enables us to do all these things much quicker. So, whether it's a capability, is that the minimum we can do? Is it the parts of that capability going to feature decomposed into stories at the story level? Is that the minimum from what we see in the acceptance criteria and the discussion that's happened? So for me, that's what's important. Is it's getting into that habit of always questioning: is this the minimum we can do? Because we can always do more. And I don't mean to shortchange quality or not give somebody what they're expecting by any means, but it's the minimum of what we can do to get feedback on and to be get a better flow of the work that we're doing.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. But I suggest a variant of the question. Is there something of this that we could deliver sooner? Is there a part of this that we could deliver sooner? Because when you say, is this the minimum, people think you might shortchange them, but your intent is to find some part that we can deliver sooner. And people won't object that there's value you could deliver sooner. So yeah, I like that. I wrote that down. That'll be added to the thing. And I want to say one other thing back to Steve, because I realized changing the word practice to habit had an implication that I didn't mean, but that's valid, what you were bringing up. Habits don't have to be, by the nature of the word, be short. I mean, when we talked practice, we meant it to be short in the technical side, but so we can have short habits or longer habits. Like TDD to me is a longer habit because takes some skill set to do, and it can involve a longer time. It's not just a quick question. So I guess open to either kind of habit, just building habits. Like exercise is a habit, but it's not something you do in a minute.
So how this would work to get into the broadcast studio, and I'm gonna throw this out there to both Steve and Al, and we're gonna see what's the best approach. The approach that we were planning on doing is you just reach out to me on LinkedIn in a private message, say, hey, I've got a habit I want to share, and I'll send you the link to get into our broadcast studio. And if you click that link, you would need to make sure that you're opening this up in Chrome. StreamYard doesn't work as well in Safari, so either Chrome or possibly Firefox, but Chrome is the one that it works the best in. But considering how many people are out there maybe live, what do you guys think? Think I'd have just because I can control inside of the broadcast studio.
If you've got somebody, let somebody come in. Otherwise, I have figured out another one, but let somebody else come in.
So I'm gonna put it in the chat. Right, I'm going to put it in the chat, and if you want to join, do you want to either Steve? Again, this was your idea. I mean, we can either say send me a direct message, or I can just put the StreamYard link.
Oh, that could work as well.
I'll put it directly in the chat, and if you want to share a habit, then I'll let you into the studio for a few minutes, and we'll see what you got. So here it goes. We'll see how this works. If you click that link and you open it in Chrome, we will see how many people join and who's shy or who's not shy. I know Claudia's not shy. So Claudia, I'm hoping you're going to click that link and you'll come on to the stream and share a habit with us.
Well, since nobody's come on yet, we'll give it another minute. Tom watching, he's got a habit he always does with me. It's not the one he actually asked about complete requirements. But he's always said, well, what does success look like?
So can we make a case study out of this?
Well, not necessarily a case study, but it's been interesting. Since he's been awesome with his time and coaching me and being a mentor to me. And he's always bugging me about that. And I got to say that sometimes it's like I ask myself, okay, what does success mean? And that quick question lets me realize that I'm embarking on something that's a lot more complicated than I thought it was, because it's not easy sometimes for me to answer what that means. And I think that's a good habit. Well, okay, what would success mean? And we don't always ask that question. Like I'm creating a new product I call Employ a Team. I have long contended that you could make something as simple as Scrum, but be way more effective, provide a lot more guidance, and enable people to use it to continuously improve. I'm actually creating that with a different way of training. It's not a course in the normal sense. It uses mural boards and stuff. And I'll be announcing it next week. But thank you, Tom. One of the things I did was I asked myself the question, what would success look like for somebody who went through this? Or what would success, actually two questions. What would success look like for them in the workshop? And what would success look for their teams that they're trying to achieve? And the moment I asked that question, I said, whoa, that's a tough question to answer because, as you know, I'm a big value stream guy, and teams are only part of the value stream. It's actually oxymoronic to talk about success of a team in isolation because that may just cause sub-optimization and not for the whole value stream. So all of a sudden, it led to this understanding there's success locally and success the team in the context, and all because I just asked, what would success look like? Well, we've got somebody there. Peter, I'll let you take somebody in.
Yeah. So, it looks like Peter might not be able to get on camera at this point, but
You can ask the question.
Yeah, if you you put one in there, post it, we'll talk about it. So I'll talk about another one of my ones that I like to see happen. So one is just, to get in the habit of seeking out feedback as quick as possible. And sometimes we don't see that with teams. We see team members, developers that they like to just do a bunch of work before they get any feedback. And then, the team itself, sometimes before they show it to a product owner, they show it to stakeholders. There's a bit of latency as opposed to seeking out feedback much quicker. And that can be, work that you're doing. It could be how you're approaching doing your work, right? Something about the workflow itself. Some of the stuff that Al is getting ready to show. I mean, Al and I have been working on some things, and there's been a whole lot of let's get some feedback pretty quick to make sure something that's going to add value or something that's going to be useful, something we want to do. So yeah, I mean, seeking out feedback and getting in that habit is another one that I think is really important.
Joshua, related to the notion of feedback, well, it is a feedback mechanism, but it's a bit different from what you just described. Is also get into the habit to dare to pull the and-on cord. Now, if you're not familiar with the and-on cord, and it's that mechanism that was used in Toyota on the production line to literally stop the line when something out of order was detected. And I think that in a lot of the ways of working in this industry, this element is forgotten. Not only is it forgotten, but I also think that most of the ways of working that we see out there are just not materially equipped to have the possibility to pull this and-on cord. Why? Well, because they lack signaling mechanism. That's, if I may pull one of my strings here. That's one of the things that I do with TameFlow. I instrument the processes with metrics, and the metrics will provide what I call work execution signals. But there's no point having work execution signals if no one reacts on them. And typically what I would expect teams to do is to swarm. So the habit of swarming, get together, get your brains together, unleash the collective intelligence. And if that doesn't work, then escalate as soon as possible. That is pulling the and-on cord, get management attention. And don't abuse management attention because it is really limited. So be very deliberate in doing this, but don't miss that opportunity, because if you're able to catch a stitch in time saves 9, as the proverb says, if you can catch a problem early, then you're much better off than discovering it much later, maybe at the end of the sprint, wasting several days.
Yeah, excellent.
Now, so Peter can't come on, but he did tell us a habit. So should we talk that?
Let's do it. Yeah, here it is.
Yeah. So I like that. And I'm going to flip it around as well, Peter. So if you're putting something at the portfolio level, have a habit to explain why we're doing it. And I would suggest the flip habit is if somebody tells you something about the portfolio level and they don't say what you just said you would do, is they should ask, well, how does that fit in? Why is this a good thing? The responsibility of clarity and communication exists on both sides in my mind. So I'm starting to get lots of them. So I'll let you call on me, Joshua, to control pace, but I've got 2 more that I've thought of.
And now, before you do that, I'm going to just put out there. So, for those, again, Claudia, been wanting to get you on a live stream for a while. So I'm going to keep saying, Claudia, do you have something, and do you want to get into the broadcast studio? And obviously, Tom, if you can get in, it would be fantastic to get you on again if you have a few moments. So go right ahead, Al.
Okay. So many of us are indoctrinated by Scrum's time boxing that we think planning, learning, demoing, and course correcting are all tied to the sprint. Now, I know we don't have to be tied to the sprint. I know it doesn't have to be that way. Although the planning, the demoing does, because those are specified there. You can add additional ones in there. But I would say take the habit of recognizing that planning, learning, demoing, course correcting are not connected in at the same time. They're not connected as a synchronous thing. Time boxing makes a certain amount of sense, but even if you time box, continuous learning should be what you're attempting to do. As close to continuous demonstration with a customer or working with a customer or not even giving feedback, but literally building the workshop. We had a very interesting experience yesterday with this Amplio at Teams where I'm now literally going to build this workshop with potential customers, not give them feedback, but have a Al's workshop where people will come in. I'll announce this on LinkedIn in the next couple of days, getting ready for it. So that would be a habit. Okay, now pause and.
So, Tom, I see your message there. There is a link that we just put in the chat box again. All that you have to do once you get your new MacBook Pro, which how exciting, those machines are pretty enticing. Click that link in Chrome, and it'll pull you into the studio and get you backstage, and then we'll get you into the stream.
I was just reading Claudia yours. How are you in anti-pattern? Then I look down and see, oh yeah, you start many tasks without finishing previous ones.
So if we're talking about the portfolio level, I think, and as we're waiting for Tom maybe to come on board, but what Tom, I think, would suggest, and I fully subscribe to that, is find good ways to capture and represent the concerns of the many stakeholders that you have. So multi-stakeholder. Hey, here we're talking about Tom, and look who comes on board. Hi, Tom.
Hi. My new toy.
Look at that. One of the new MacBooks.
Yeah. So here's the box it comes in.
You're going to walk out to your garage and show us your new Tesla too?
Yeah.
Is every time something new comes out, you're able to get it? Because that's a nice habit.
Yes, that's what I do.
So, Tom, I was just saying about multi-stakeholder value at the portfolio management level. I guess that's something you have opinions about.
Yeah. I put in a remark in the just a moment. My wife's kicking me out of the living room. She's on the call too. Anyway, we need to. My first habit is make sure the requirements are clear and complete, and they're usually not. And people often think they are. So there's no point in doing anything else in any other habit until you've got a pretty good set of requirements. They don't have to be perfect. Okay. So now I also focus on value requirements. There are lots of others like functional requirements, design constraints, budgets, but value requirements are what the stakeholders really want. That's the whole point of the project, is making progress on improving those values in their direction. So, and I don't think people have learned to focus on value requirements at all. I mean, we talk about value and suddenly they're talking about dollar value downstream. They're not really talking about, for example, enhanced security to take a quality value or anything remotely like that. So I think I'll stop there. But one, make sure you're really talking about value, the values of the critical stakeholders, the critical values that'll make or break you, quantify them, of course, always. And 99.9% of people aren't anywhere near that, and they don't even realize they're not near that. Now, I better shut up. and start my Mac Pro.
So Peter's got a question to see if anyone else out there would like to maybe post something in the chat, or even again come on and join us. Peter would like to know if anyone has a great habit regarding successful agile budgeting.
Well, that sounds like a Timeflow thing. Budgeting.
Steve, was that a good tee up? I mean, come on.
And if he doesn't get it solved, I've got one too, but he'll probably have a better one than me. So go for it, Steve.
So of course, we would ask Herbie how to do budgeting, because the ideas of TOC applies incredibly well for the budgeting process. And the main idea is the one that we see repeated over and over again in TOC when we're talking about, for instance, retail distribution, or we're talking about critical chain project management. What is the idea? It's the fact that it's very hard to make estimates, and individuals will always pad their estimates for safety. Budgeting is an estimation process, so there is a lot of padding, and there is also a lot of conflict. My slice of the cake has to be larger than yours, and of course you are measured on how much you have in your budget. The larger, the better. So what we would do in this instance is to take all the budgets that has been asked for, slash it in half. You get only half what you asked, and then all the other half is put in a common pot as a common aggregator of variability, and it's there available to be deployed the moment that there is a need at any point in time and at any project or activity that the organization is engaging with. What is the great thing about this? Well, like all of TOC, you get everyone behind the same thing, so you create the unity of purpose, and you really erode the conflictual habits, so negative habits, anti-habits, if you want, all that come out of the traditional conventional budgeting processes.
I'm going to give a lighter weight answer. I like what you said. So this is not a build out of that or any counterpoint, but sometimes you should ask yourself, are we really budgeting? And let me give the background of this. A long time ago, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that. Our president was at a big bank, a division of the retail division of a large bank. And they were sitting down for their annual budget. And that's what they said. Okay, we're going to figure out what our annual budget is. And he asked them, are you hiring anybody? And they said, no. Are you firing anybody? They said, no. Are there any major capital expenditures that don't match what we did this last year? And they said, no. So he said, oh, so we already have our budget. You already know how much money you have to spend. And I said, yeah. So you're not budgeting, are you? You're allocating. And there's a difference between the two. So just knowing, are you budgeting or are you allocating? That's why in the discipline Agile Value Stream Consultant, we call it Agile Budgeting and Lean Allocation, because it's what's my budget, but then I allocate just in time idea. So just worth making a note. I'll be quiet now for you to get back with me, Joshua, or not.
So Peter had a note in here to Tom's habit. So adding to Tom's habit, I've seen teams build in a sprint zero to focus on framing the scope and setting the initiative boundaries. And I would be derelict as an ambassador of Discipline Agile if I didn't also mention that at the team level, the two life cycles at the team level for projects, right? The Agile life cycle and Lean life cycle have an inception phase. And part of what we're doing is a little bit of upfront planning, a little bit of requirements definition, right? A further understanding of what we potentially are going to be able to do before we move forward, right? So there's a very lightweight milestone there that says, hey, let's do a little bit. Let's get some feedback on this, right? We need to be able to share what we're going to commit to doing with our stakeholders, and for the stakeholders then agree that yeah, we got to get a good strategy to move forward, and we can set some expectations. So I sprint zero, right? If you're on a Scrum team, or the inception phase, if you're using Discipline Agile. And from a team flow perspective, then Steve, what are some of the things that in that early moments in time that you would tie in, if there are any? Which I know.
Like Tom teaches, it's good to proceed by tiny steps, and from a project portfolio perspective, those might correspond to the MBIs that you have in DA, or to my moves that I have in TameFlow. And that's like try to do the right thing. So think about it before you actually start going ahead, is what we capture in the full kitting activity, where not only do we try to figure out what is needed, it is, of course, do we have everything available to ensure that we can do what we're supposed to do, but it's also more about thinking about the value. So how do we attribute a value to the move we're about to undertake? And this is interesting because it requires another habit, which is often dearly missing in many companies, and that is the collaboration between the business side and the engineering side. Hey, those two have to talk to one another. What a surprise, what a discovery. Why? Well, because if you want to have a reasoning on the business side, well, you have to attribute at least a dollar value to what you want to do, if not all the possible stakeholder values that Tom can quantify. And that is a business exercise. But then we have the other dimension, the time dimension, and that's where engineering comes in. And that's where you need to provide some sort of reply to the answer, when will it be done? Typically, you do that with estimates, you do it with story points. In TameFlow, I do none of that. We use probabilistic forecasting, so the engineers don't have to be concerned about inventing, guesstimating, and giving numbers out of the blue with the crystal ball and all of that.
So one thing I'll ask, and this is for those of you that are out there live right now, as well as anybody that's watching this on replay. When I hear Steve talk about his moves, I'm thinking we need a little picture of Steve that looks like John Travolta in Saturday Night Live. That is, I was going to do it, Hal. Exactly. We need to have something that shows Steve TameFlow's move, just to paint a better mental model. I was going to say a better picture, but we'll have a mental model.
I'm not sure that's a better mental model. Sorry.
You will never forget that one.
No, that'll be printed.
That's really an educational episode.
Okay, I want to throw in a little historical context as one of the two people who invented Sprint Zero. A lot of people don't know Dan Rawsthorne and I created Sprint Zero. And we did it a long time ago. I don't know, 2001, 2002. And I remember we were in the Net Objectives conference room and we were talking about every sprint, you need to get something delivered. But what if you're not ready to even start? You don't have your team. You don't know how to communicate. You don't know what the roles are. You don't even know what language you're using. You're just not ready at all to get anything done. So we said, well, you don't want to start a design up front. We're not talking about big design up front or anything like that, but just how do you get ready for the team, like you mentioned in Inception. So we said, oh, you need a sprint for that. Now, Dan and I are both old-time C programmers, let alone C++ programmers. And in C, it's zero base. So it was like, well, before you start, zero made sense. So that's how Sprint Zero came up, because we didn't want to differ from Ken's statement, every sprint added value. So Sprint 1 adds value, but Sprint 0, well, it's not a real sprint. And also be clear, it's not a real sprint also in time. Sometimes Sprint 0 isn't necessary. Sometimes Sprint 0 is a day. Sometimes Sprint 0, it's a week. It's the smallest you can get to prepare. That's our intention. Now, it's been bastardized a bit, not a surprise given it's 20 years old, but that was anyway our intention when we came up with that.
So I'll put another one of the things I like to see that a good habit to form is the tie-in is to handoffs, right? And handoffs happen, right? Even if you're on a somewhat good cross-functional team. And so I like to talk about the habit of getting into and saying, is there something else I could do? Like if I hand this off to Steve, and then Steve's going to hand it off to Tom, who's going to hand it off to Al, right? Is there a little bit more I might be able to do to minimize that handoff? Because I might figure something out that is like, ooh, I'm glad I didn't hand that off because it probably would have been handed right back to me, right? So just, again, pausing for a moment and thinking, right, is there something else that maybe I can do before I do hand this off for somebody else to hopefully do the next value-adding activity or task or whatever to keep moving the work forward?
Well, that's a bit going back to the ideas of definition of ready, definition of done. Well, are you sure you have completed your step? Or from Tom's perspective, the process entry and exit conditions. Have you done everything that needs to be done before you pass the ball, the bucket to the next person in line?
Yeah.
Well, since it's handoffs, I have another habit with a handoff. Don't do them. And when you have to, and I had this happen to me a lot on projects, somebody would say, oh, well, you hand that off to us. And what they wanted me was to email it to them. And I said, no, but I'll be happy to talk to you about it. I'm not sure. I was always, I was working sometimes with people who, in my experience, weren't as agile as they might be. And I think sometimes there was a little irritation that I wouldn't email a requirement to somebody, or if I had knowledge about something, I said, okay, this is what needs to happen. I would never hand it off. I would always talk to them about it. So I'm not saying you always should do that, but you ought to consider when should you say no to a handoff and say, no, but I'll be happy to talk to you.
I think that also depends on, the domain that you're acting on and on, the scale of the organization. If you're in a relatively small company, small engineering department, then of course face-to-face communication is always very powerful and direct. It short circuits the communication paths, so there is a lot to gain. But when you are in situations where you might have hundreds of people and tens of teams, then all these communication processes need to be more formal, so to say. It's not necessarily a handoff as such. It can be, but just the sheer size and the sheer number of moving parts require some more formal way of communicating.
Yeah, agreed.
And that's also where you can get into other kinds of habits, like, for instance, document what you're doing, which doesn't mean commenting the code, but make sure that for instance, any critical decision that you've made is documented somewhere, because you will always get to that point where you will be asked, why is it like this? And when you don't remember yourself, well, then you know you have a problem.
I want to comment on Peter's last comment. What about handoffs involving vendors who are contributing to the sprint or increment and aren't following your way of working? So here's a habit. Always remember that your vendors work for you. Now that sounds silly, but I can't tell you how many places I go into where the vendors specify what's going to happen, which is insane. It's like walking into an automotive dealership and saying, oh, here's the car you have to buy. Or into a hair salon and say, this is the haircut I'm going to give you. You're paying them money. I'm always astounded by the number of companies who hire vendors who don't work in a sensible way for the company. Now, I know why it happens, but it's insane anyway.
So, Tom, since you're still on, do you have any other nuggets you would like to share?
Mute. Of late, I've begun going deeper into Elon Musk's practices. And let's put it this way. There's a book out there by Joe Justice called Scrum Master, which, in the one hand, is, let's just say, it's the most advanced form of Scrum I've ever seen. And what it does, it takes Scrum and it adds Musk's methods to it. And to some, I'm trying to pin it down because Musk hasn't written a book on this yet. You know, you get oral interviews with him while he's walking around SpaceX and begin to see some of his, but he's obviously very successful in hardware and software and making money. So I think he's worth studying, to put it mildly, and I'm studying him deeply now. But one thing he does, he has pods of people, like six interdisciplinary people working together. And they have interfaces which interface with all other pods, whether this is in a production line at SpaceX or Tesla or development. And he is fanatic on metrics. And in other words, it's everybody either has clear real metrics goals for the qualities they're aiming towards, the safety, for example, in the car, or at least, and they have real feedback, real time as far as possible, or at least from models, like how would what we're doing impact the whole corporation of Tesla kind of models. And he also, within their cycle, which we can call a sprint, does two things which are fairly dramatic. He says, can you guys think of anything to improve your cycle, to shorten it? Can you think of anything you can do like right now before you finish the cycle? By the way, can you think of anything to improve the qualities that we're focusing on for your product or your output? And by the way, is that anything you can do right now in this cycle? Now that gives you some idea of the drama there. There are quite a lot of free videos from Joe Justice is one source, and Elon Musk wandering around SpaceX factory recently is another. And I've written a thing I call Musk's Methods, which I've put up on my LinkedIn site, where I'm trying to really write down, but his methods parallel my own Evo and language methods amazingly well. And some people have even said, did he pick him up from you, Tom? And I said, no, I think he's just using common sense and finding out what works, like I've always done. So, yeah, but so that's my current fascination. And if anybody there thinks they know more about Musk's methods than Joe Justice and I know, please tell us about them. Give us your written sources. There's a problem getting them documented. Now, although Joe Justice, honor to him, has tried to do it in his videos and his books.
Excellent.
Now there is an interesting, several interesting things there, but the idea of having pods, as you call them, or as they were called, goes back to one of the fundamental elements of high-performing teams and organizations, which really boils down to the social structure, the social fabric of the organization. And if you start studying this, you will see that the degree of interconnectedness of people has a huge significance. And what I hear you say there is that there probably has been like a deliberate effort on structuring the teams so that these social networks, the paths of communication, interaction, decision making, and feedback are very, very attuned to the objectives that this development structure wants to achieve. So that highlights how important it is to study and take into consideration the social aspects of any knowledge work organization.
So Peter has a good question here that I wanted to at least give some of my thoughts on. Has the panel seen any good or bad habits surface as a result of the COVID pandemic and this extended period of remote working? And I've got two things that immediately came to mind. One is, turn your camera on. If you're in a team meeting and you're trying to work with someone else, or it's two of you, turn your cameras on. I get in the habit. And I'm not saying, I understand there's, times where people don't have an office that are set up to not have things behind you or other things going on in your house where, sure, there are times where you might need to turn it off for privacy or to limit distraction. But other than that, turn it on so at least we can see and communicate differently. And the second part of what I've seen really help is use a virtual collaboration platform like Miro or Mural or some of these other ones. Miro in particular is one that just adds so much value in the way that people can collaborate and do things both synchronously and asynchronously. The new functionality that's been rolled out because of the increased usage of Miro. We've been using Miro for quite some time, long before the pandemic. And the amount of growth that Miro has had, like its competitors, the functionality just keeps getting better and better and better. So those are the two things that I would say from a habit perspective. Really, I've seen just a big change come from those simple things, especially the turn the camera on. That's simple. But Tom, Steve, and Al, what do you think of Peter's question?
Can you put it up there again?
Yeah.
Well, definitely, I would say there are also many anti-patterns with COVID, like the excess use of these online communication tools, because it's so easy to let's just jump on a call and at the end of the day you've been on the call more hours than there are in the day, so you get nothing done. So I think that has a huge learning opportunity that you need to shield off buckets of time where you can do focused work. If you don't do that, then this situation will result in not being productive at all. But at the end, even worse, it's not sustainable, and you might get stressed out.
That's a good point, Steve, but there's another option too. I'm just thinking back to some of the last couple of projects I was on at the PMI building things. the value stream microcred was a small team working, and before that, the value stream consultant workshop. And what we did, we might have blocked out a certain amount of time, but our standing agreement was at the beginning of the meeting, we would talk about how short we could make it, or like what really needed to be talked about. We had any number of meetings where we blocked out an hour, and the first thing we did is nothing critical, and then the meeting was over in 30 seconds. And sometimes it was over in 5 minutes. So we paid a lot of attention to the fact that we could have more frequent touch points. They weren't daily stand-ups. They were more than that. Sometimes they would last an hour, but they were frequent touch points that we kept to be as quick as possible. So making meetings, not, I'm giving you back 20 minutes, but rather I'm taking 40 minutes if it's a 40-minute meeting. This idea that you block out the time for people is a bad mindset. So the habit of how much time am I taking and let's keep it minimal is something we did. It was very useful.
Well, I would go back to the work execution signals, because what they enable is what I call management by exception, where by default you have 0 meetings. You don't have meetings at all. And you call them only on an ad hoc as needed basis, when the information, the metrics, the situational awareness, judgment call for a meeting. The other thing is that with the teams I'm working most closely with, I'm also instituting the way that Jeff Bezos is handling meetings. For those meetings that have to be held because they maybe are of a strategic nature, planning nature, and so on, use a memo-driven approach. What does that mean? That the participants, those who have something to say in the meeting, will have to write a memo, maybe jointly now with a Google Docs, a shared document. They write their contribution there. When the meeting starts, it starts in silence. And the first 10, 15 minutes are dedicated to reading the document. So you create time for people to take in the information, and then the actual conversation starts, and the key points will have been listed there very clearly, very articulate. So you get straight to the point, and you avoid the other thing that we have in meetings typically, that someone is talking, maybe showing a PowerPoint, and all others are in another window on Facebook, like, I'm here. I got a message. Okay, sorry about that. So you see, with that memo-driven approach, people are, they have no excuse. They have to know what the topic is, and then the conversation, the quality of the conversation is much, much higher.
Yeah, and the whole Steve, your point about it's so easy. You're in meetings, you're on Zoom calls or Teams calls or whatever all day long, and it's pretty prevalent with some.
By the way, Joshua, I don't use Facebook, so.
Sure, that's not what you're looking at. Yeah, but when you ask people, like, when are you most productive? Like, when is it the time that you get the most done? And somebody that's kind of an early riser might say, I get into the office, or I start working now at, from 6 a.m. to 7:45. That's when I have to get everything done, because otherwise I get pulled into all these things. Or Tom, you've mentioned you do a lot of your writing pretty late at night and early into the morning, right? It's because you don't have interruptions.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so being able to show how all these additional meetings, or again, somebody's going over something a bit too lengthy, and people are on Facebook or doing something else, is just not very productive. And I cannot always believe how quickly the time goes, but we're pretty much within a minute or two of where we typically try to wrap up. And so with that, Al's got one more. It looks like he wants to share.
Yeah, I got two more. They'll be real fast. Use the word sequence instead of priority. That's always sequence the word. Don't prioritize the word. But the other one that's related to the pandemic is what one of my guys called the rule of three. And what it is if you get an email and it's the third time it's gone back and forth, you say, rule of three, let's talk. The first time Jim Trott came up with this, first time happened, he asked me something, I asked him something, he sent me something back. I asked him something again, he sent me something back. I asked him something the third time and he said, rule of three, let's talk. Now I was his boss. And I was actually like, what the hell? I'm his boss. He's not answering my question now. But I settled down and I realized Jim's a smart guy. And it was because if you haven't gotten your question answered 2 times, what's the chance you're going to get it answered the third time? So it turns out it's a big time saver. If you've asked the same question even differently 3 times, or you get it asked to you, take rule of 3. Let's talk. A lot better than going back and forth left by email. That's it for me. This was a great session. I'm glad there's so many good ideas here.
Yeah, it was.
So I will conclude my part with, the voice from Herbie from deep out in the woods. Get into the habit of applying the 5 focusing steps.
And I'm going to end with a habit that says, whenever you're doing a live stream, see if Tom can join you. Tom, thanks again for jumping on and sharing some thoughts as always. Fantastic to have you join us.
It was a tough call, my Mac Pro and you guys, but I'm doing both at the same time. It's open and on.
All right. Yeah. Well, thanks everybody. For those of you that joined us live, and for those of you that might be watching this on replay, continue to in the LinkedIn chat. If you've got a habit, or again, as Steve said, not just an agile habit, but a common sense habit, put it in and share with everyone. And we'll see you on the next episode.
Take care. Be safe. And
Bye.
Thanks for all you veterans out there.
Yeah.